Blood-tied vows. Cursed by a jealous sister, saved by a forbidden mate. Chapter 1, The Binding. The silver chains burned against Lyra's wrists as she knelt in the moonlit clearing, her sister's voice echoing through the ancient pines like a death knell. Seraphina stood above her, emerald eyes blazing with centuries of suppressed jealousy, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air as dark magic crackled between her fingers. "You always were father's favorite," Seraphina hissed, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 bitter nights. "The golden child, the perfect daughter, the one destined to lead our coven." Her lips curved into a cruel smile. "Not anymore." Lyra struggled against her bonds, feeling the silver searing through her supernatural strength. "Sarah, please. We're sisters. We're blood. Blood that runs thick with resentment," Seraphina spat. "Do you know what it's like to live in someone's shadow for 3 centuries? To watch as every suitor, every ally, every opportunity falls at your feet while I'm forgotten in the corners?" The ritual circle carved into the earth began to glow with an otherworldly purple light. Ancient runes pulsed with malevolent energy as Seraphina's voice rose to a crescendo, her auburn hair whipping around her face in the supernatural wind she'd conjured. "I curse you, sister mine," Seraphina intoned, her voice now carrying the power of their ancestral bloodline. "I strip you of your magic, your immortality, your very essence. You will become mortal, fragile as a flower, aging with each passing day until death claims what I cannot." The magic hit Lyra like a physical blow, tearing through her very soul. She screamed as power she'd known for over 2 centuries was ripped away, leaving her hollow and aching. Her supernatural senses dimmed, her strength ebbed, and she could feel mortality settling into her bones like ice. "But that's not all," Seraphina continued, her eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. "You will be drawn to the wolf packs of the Northern Territory. You will find your mate among the very creatures our kind has warred with for millennia. And when you do..." She leaned down, her breath cold against Lyra's ear. "He will be your only salvation. Love him, and you might find a way to break this curse. Reject him, and you will wither away within the year." As the last words of the curse left Seraphina's lips, the silver chains dissolved, and Lyra collapsed to the forest floor. When she looked up, her sister was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of bitter herbs and the echo of ancient magic in the air. Lyra pressed her palm to the earth, searching for even a whisper of the power that had once flowed through her veins. Nothing. She was truly mortal now, cast out from everything she'd ever known, with only one terrifying path forward, into the territory of werewolves, the sworn enemies of witches. Thunder rumbled overhead as rain began to fall, and Lyra forced herself to stand on trembling legs. The Northern Territory lay 3 days' journey through treacherous mountain passes, assuming she could even survive the trip in her newly fragile state. But what choice did she have? It was either face the wolves or face certain death. As she began walking toward the mountains, each step taking her further from her old life, Lyra wondered what kind of creature would be waiting for her in those wild lands, and whether love could truly triumph over centuries of hatred between their kinds. Chapter 2, Into the Wild. The mountain path was treacherous even for someone with supernatural abilities. For a newly mortal witch, it was nearly impossible. Lyra's feet, accustomed to floating gracefully above rough terrain, now ached with every step over sharp stones and twisted roots. Her once pristine silk gown was torn and muddy, offering little protection against the biting wind that seemed to cut through her fragile human flesh. On the second day, exhaustion forced her to take shelter in a shallow cave. As she huddled against the cold stone wall, Lyra tried to process the magnitude of her sister's betrayal. Seraphina had always been competitive, but this was pure malice. To strip away not just her magic, but force her into the arms of their ancient enemies, it was psychological torture as much as physical curse. The irony wasn't lost on her. For centuries, witches and werewolves had been locked in a blood feud that stretched back to the very origins of their species. Witches saw wolves as savage beasts barely contained in human form. Wolves viewed witches as manipulative creatures who twisted nature to their own ends. Interspecies relationships weren't just forbidden, they were considered an abomination by both sides. And yet, here she was, compelled by dark magic to seek out the very thing both species despised most, a union between witch and wolf. As night fell on her second day of travel, Lyra caught her first scent of werewolf territory. Even with her diminished senses, the musky, wild smell was unmistakable. It triggered every instinct she'd been trained to have: fear, revulsion, the need to flee. But the curse pulled her forward like an invisible chain, making each step away from the territory physically painful. She pressed on through the darkness, following a deer trail that wound deeper into the forest. The trees here grew thicker and taller, their branches forming a canopy so dense it blocked out the stars. Strange sounds echoed through the woods, howls in the distance, the crack of breaking branches, rustling that seemed too large to be made by any normal forest creature. It was near midnight when she stumbled into the clearing. 20 pairs of glowing eyes turned toward her, reflecting the moonlight like golden coins scattered across the darkness. Lyra froze, her newly mortal heart hammering against her ribs as massive wolves emerged from the shadows. They were larger than any natural wolf had a right to be, with intelligence burning in their gaze that spoke of the human souls trapped within those powerful forms. The largest of them stepped forward, a black wolf with silver markings across his muzzle. Even in wolf form, there was something regal about his bearing, something that spoke of leadership and barely contained power. When he shifted, bones cracking and reforming with sounds that made Lyra's stomach turn, the man who stood before her took her breath away. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell in waves to his shoulders and skin that seemed to glow with inner warmth despite the cool night air. Tribal tattoos spiraled across his chest and arms, marks that Lyra recognized as pack symbols, though she'd never seen them this close before. But it was his eyes that held her captive, deep amber orbs that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Witch," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. It wasn't a question, he could smell what she was, even in her diminished state. "You're either very brave or very stupid to walk into our territory alone." Lyra lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of pride she didn't know she still possessed. "Neither. I'm cursed." A murmur went through the pack at this admission. The other wolves had shifted back to human form now, forming a loose circle around her. She could see the suspicion in their faces, the barely contained hostility. To them, she was everything they'd been taught to hate. The pack leader stepped closer, and Lyra caught his scent. Pine and rain and something wild that made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't understand. "I am Kale Shadowmane, Alpha of the Northern Pack. Explain yourself, witch, before I decide you're a threat that needs eliminating." Chapter 3, Recognition. "My name is Lyra Moonwhisper," she began, surprised by how steady her voice sounded despite the terror coursing through her veins. "I was cursed by my sister, stripped of my magic and mortality restored. The curse, it compels me to seek out my mate among your kind." The words hung in the air like a blasphemy. Several of the pack members growled low in their throats, their eyes beginning to glow with the amber light that preceded a shift. Kale held up a hand, and the growling ceased immediately, though the tension in the clearing remained thick enough to cut. "A mate?" Kale's voice was carefully controlled, but Lyra could see the storm brewing in his amber eyes. "You speak of sacred bonds as if they're some kind of punishment." "To my sister, they are," Lyra replied bitterly. She knew that forcing me to love one of your kind would be the cruelest fate she could devise. Witches and wolves were not supposed to. "No," Kale cut her off sharply. "We're not." He began to pace, his movements predatory and fluid. "For over 1,000 years, our kinds have spilled each other's blood. My own great-grandfather died in a witch's binding circle. My pack has standing orders to kill any witch who sets foot in our territory." "Then kill me," Lyra said quietly, surprised by her own words. "It would be kinder than what awaits me if I fail to find my mate. The curse will consume me slowly, aging me to death within a year. Something flickered across Cale's features. Was it compassion? Before she could analyze it further, the wind shifted, carrying her scent more fully to him. His nostrils flared, and his entire body went rigid. The other pack members tensed, sensing their alpha's sudden change in demeanor. "No," Cale whispered, his voice barely audible. "It can't be." But even as he spoke the denial, Lyra felt it too, a pulling sensation in her chest, as if an invisible thread connected her heart to his. The curse had brought her here, yes, but this feeling, this recognition, it was something deeper. Something that transcended magic and spoke to the very core of who she was. "You feel it too," she breathed, taking an involuntary step toward him. Cale's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "No. I refuse to accept this. You're a witch. Our kinds are enemies. This is some kind of trick, some spell you've cast." "I have no magic left," Lyra interrupted. "I'm as mortal as any human now. I couldn't cast a spell if my life depended on it." She paused, then added with bitter humor, "Which it does." The mate bond, for that's what it was, undeniable despite its impossibility, pulsed between them like a living thing. Lyra could see the internal war raging across Cale's features, the way his wolf was calling to something deep inside her that she'd never known existed. "Alpha," one of the pack members spoke up, a woman with short-cropped brown hair and suspicious green eyes. "This could be a trap. The witches could be using her as bait." "She's mortal, Elena," Cale said without taking his eyes off Lyra. "I can smell it on her. Whatever she was before, she's nearly human now." "All the more reason not to trust her," Elena shot back. "Since when do witches give up their power willingly? This reeks of deception." Other voices joined in, a chorus of distrust and anger. Lyra found herself surrounded by hostile faces, and even though she understood their suspicion, it still cut deep. She'd lost everything, her magic, her immortality, her family, her home, and now she was being accused of orchestrating her own downfall. "Enough," Cale's voice cut through the arguments like a blade. The pack fell silent immediately, their alpha's authority absolute. He studied Lyra for a long moment, conflict clear in his expression. "You'll stay. For tonight. Under guard. Tomorrow, we'll decide what to do with you." "Cale," Elena protested. "You can't be serious. She's a witch." "She's my mate," Cale said quietly, the words clearly costing him. "Like it or not, Elena, the bond is real. I can feel it calling to every instinct I have." The admission sent a shockwave through the pack. Some looked horrified, others confused, a few seemed curious despite themselves. But Elena's face went pale, and Lyra caught something in her expression that looked suspiciously like heartbreak. "That's impossible," Elena whispered. "Many things are impossible until they happen," Cale replied. His gaze found Lyra's again, and she felt that strange pulling sensation intensify. "The question is, what do we do about it? Break time equals 0. 5s/. Chapter 4, Bonds and Barriers. Lyra spent that first night in what the pack generously called guest quarters, essentially a converted storage shed with a thin mattress and a bucket for water. 2 guards stationed themselves outside, their watchful presence making sleep nearly impossible. Not that she could have rested easily anyway. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the mate bond tugging at her consciousness, drawing her awareness toward Cale like a compass pointing north. She'd heard of mate bonds, of course. Every supernatural creature knew the legends, the idea that somewhere in the world existed another being who completed your soul, whose very presence could heal wounds and whose absence could drive you to madness. But she'd always assumed they were just stories, romantic fairy tales told to explain powerful attractions. This was no fairy tale. The bond was a living thing, pulsing with energy that seemed to flow between her and Cale even when they were apart. She could sense his restlessness, his internal struggle, the way his wolf paced behind his human facade like a caged animal. And underlying it all was a hunger that both thrilled and terrified her, a deep, primal need that had nothing to do with the curse and everything to do with the way his amber eyes seemed to see straight through her careful defenses. Dawn brought Elena with a tray of food and an expression of barely contained hostility. The pack's second-in-command was beautiful in a fierce, wild way, all lean muscle and predatory grace, with eyes that promised violence to anyone who threatened what she considered hers. "Eat," Elena commanded, setting the tray down with more force than necessary. "Kale wants you healthy for whatever comes next." Lyra picked at the bread and dried meat, her appetite diminished by both nerves and the other woman's obvious animosity. "You love him," she said quietly. Elena's hand moved to the knife at her belt. "What I feel is none of your concern, which—" "I'm not your enemy," Lyra said, meeting Elena's gaze steadily. "I didn't choose this any more than he did." "But you're here," Elena snarled. "You're here with your cursed bond and your tragic story, and you expect us to just accept that our alpha, the strongest, most honorable man any of us have ever known, is somehow meant to be with a creature we've spent lifetimes learning to kill." The pain in Elena's voice was unmistakable, and Lyra felt a stab of sympathy despite the other woman's hostility. "I understand why you hate me. But the bond?" "The bond is an abomination," Elena cut her off. "You think some mystical connection erases 1,000 years of bloodshed? My parents died in a witch's binding circle. My brother was tortured to death by your kind when I was barely 16. And now I'm supposed to welcome you into our pack because fate decided to play a cosmic joke?" Lyra set down her barely touched food. "I lost everything too. My home, my family, my very identity. I'm not here because I want to be, I'm here because it was the only choice I had between this and death." "Maybe you should have chosen death," Elena said coldly. "It would have been kinder to all of us." Before Lyra could respond, a howl echoed through the morning air, Kale's voice calling the pack together. Elena's expression shifted from hostility to professional alertness in an instant. "Pack meeting," she said curtly. "You're wanted." They walked through the pack's territory in tense silence. Lyra was surprised by what she saw. Rather than the savage wilderness she'd expected, the northern pack lived in a carefully maintained settlement that blended seamlessly with the forest around it. Cabins were built into hillsides and around the trunks of massive trees, connected by paths that followed the natural contours of the land. Gardens flourished in clearings, children played in communal areas, and everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of a thriving community built on cooperation and mutual respect. It was nothing like the picture of werewolf society she'd been raised with: no chaos, no barely contained violence, no evidence of the savage brutality witches attributed to wolf packs. These people had built something beautiful, something that honored both their human and wolf natures. The pack had gathered in a natural amphitheater formed by a ring of ancient oaks. Kale stood at the center, and even from a distance, Lyra could feel the mate bond humming with awareness of his presence. When his eyes found hers across the crowd, the connection intensified until she could swear she felt his heartbeat matching her own. "My packmates," Kale began, his voice carrying easily to every member of the assembled group. "Last night, we encountered something unprecedented. A witch has come to our territory, stripped of her magic and claiming to be cursed. More than that." He paused, his gaze finding Lyra's again. "She appears to be my mate." The reaction was immediate and divided. Some pack members looked intrigued, others horrified, still others confused. An elderly man near the front shook his head in dismay. "Alpha," he said, rising to his feet. "With all due respect, this goes against everything we believe, everything we've fought for. How can we trust that this isn't some elaborate trap?" "Because I can feel the bond," Kale replied simply. "As can she. Mate bonds don't lie, Marcus. They can't be faked or forced. But they can be twisted," a young woman called out. "Dark magic can corrupt even the most sacred connections." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Lyra felt her cheeks burn with shame and frustration. Every word they spoke was logical, reasonable, and yet completely wrong. She knew with bone-deep certainty that what she felt for Cale was real, regardless of how impossible it should be. "I propose a trial," Elena's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. Chapter 5: The Trial of Truth. All eyes turned to Elena as she stepped forward, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who'd found the perfect solution to an impossible problem. Cale's expression grew wary. He knew his second well enough to recognize when she was planning something that wouldn't go in his favor. "Speak," he commanded, though wariness colored his tone. Elena's smile was sharp as a blade. "The trial of truth. It's ancient pack law, hasn't been used in over 50 years, but it's still binding. If this witch truly believes she's your mate, let her prove it." Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. Even Marcus, the elderly pack member who'd expressed doubt, looked intrigued. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. She'd never heard of this trial, but from the way the pack members were reacting, it wasn't something pleasant. "Elena," Cale's voice carried a warning. "The trial of truth is dangerous even for full werewolves. She's mortal now. It could kill her." "Then perhaps she should have thought of that before claiming bonds that can't exist," Elena replied coolly. "Unless, of course, she's lying about the mate connection. In which case, she's a spy and should be executed anyway." Lyra stepped forward, ignoring the way several pack members tensed at her movement. "What is this trial?" An ancient woman near the back of the gathering rose slowly to her feet. Her hair was white as moonlight, her face marked with intricate tattoos that seemed to shift and move in the dappled light. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "I am Grandmother Willow, keeper of the old ways," she said. "The trial of truth is our most sacred test. It strips away all deception, all self-delusion, all comfortable lies. The participant must face 3 challenges that reveal the deepest truths of their heart." "And if they fail?" Lyra asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The trial consumes those who carry darkness in their souls," Grandmother Willow replied. "Those who live by lies, who harbor malice, who would do harm to the pack, they do not survive. But those whose hearts are pure, whose intentions are true." She smiled, and for a moment looked decades younger. "They emerge stronger than they were before." Cale moved to stand beside Lyra, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "This is madness. I won't risk her life to satisfy pack politics." "It's not your choice, Alpha," Elena said smoothly. "Pack law is clear. When the truth of a mate bond is questioned, either party may call for the trial. I invoke that right on behalf of the pack." "I accept," Lyra said quietly, before Cale could object. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that fell over the gathering. Cale turned to stare at her, his amber eyes wide with shock and something that might have been admiration. "Lyra, no," he said urgently. "You don't understand what you're agreeing to. The trial, it's not just dangerous, it's designed for werewolves. Our constitution, our healing abilities, our connection to the pack mind, without those, you'll be facing it alone and vulnerable." "I'm already alone and vulnerable," Lyra replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "At least this way, if I die, it will be trying to prove something true rather than wasting away under my sister's curse." She turned to face the assembled pack, drawing herself up to her full height despite the way her newly mortal body trembled with exhaustion and fear. "I accept the trial of truth. When do we begin?" Grandmother Willow's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval. "The trial begins at moonrise. Until then, you must fast and meditate, purifying your spirit for what's to come." She paused, her ancient gaze moving between Lyra and Cale. "But first, there is something you both must understand. The trial of truth doesn't just test the one who faces it, it creates a temporary bridge between souls. If she is truly your mate, Alpha, you will experience everything she does. Her pain will be your pain, her fear will be your fear. If she dies, The old woman's voice trailed off meaningfully. If she dies, so do I, Cale finished grimly. The mate bond is stronger than most people realize, Grandmother Willow confirmed. Especially when awakened under such unusual circumstances. The magic recognizes no boundaries between species, only the truth of two hearts meant to beat as one. Elena's confident expression faltered for the first time. Clearly, she hadn't considered that her trial might put Cale at risk as well. But she recovered quickly, her chin lifting with stubborn determination. Then we'll know for certain whether the bond is real, she said. If they both survive, no one can question it again. Cale's hand found Lyra's, his fingers warm and strong as they intertwined with hers. The mate bond pulsed at the contact, sending waves of comfort and strength through her exhausted body. You don't have to do this, he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Yes, I do, Lyra replied, squeezing his hand. If we're going to have any chance at all, your pack has to believe in us. And honestly. She managed a small smile. I need to believe in us too. Chapter 6, Preparation. The hours before moonrise passed with agonizing slowness. Lyra spent them in the small cabin Grandmother Willow had prepared, following the elders' instructions for purification. No food, only spring water blessed under the full moon. Meditation focused on stripping away everything but truth. And most difficultly, complete isolation from Cale and the comforting presence of the mate bond. It was torture. Without the constant awareness of him humming in the background of her consciousness, Lyra felt more alone than she ever had in her centuries of life. The silence in her mind, where magic used to flow like a river, became deafening. For the first time since her sister's betrayal, she had space to truly comprehend everything she'd lost. Her magic had been more than just power, it had been her identity, her purpose, her very sense of self. She'd been trained from childhood to see herself as one of the chosen, a guardian of ancient wisdom, a protector of the natural order. Now she was nothing. Less than nothing, she was an abomination, a witch without magic seeking salvation from creatures she'd been taught to despise. But as the sun set and the first silver fingers of moonlight began to filter through the cabin windows, Lyra found something else beneath the grief and fear. Determination. Maybe even hope. Because regardless of the impossibility of it all, regardless of centuries of hatred between their kinds, what she felt for Cale was real. She'd felt many things in her long life, attraction, fondness, even something she'd mistaken for love, but nothing like this. The mate bond wasn't just desire or companionship. It was recognition on the deepest possible level, a sense of coming home to a place she'd never known she was looking for. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. It's time, Grandmother Willow's voice called through the door. Lyra rose on shaking legs and stepped outside. The pack had assembled again, but this time they carried torches and wore expressions of solemn ceremony. At their center waited three structures that hadn't been there before, ancient stone circles covered in runes that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering firelight. Cale stood beside the first circle, his face a mask of barely controlled worry. When their eyes met, Lyra felt the mate bond snap back into place with enough force to steal her breath. His fear hit her like a physical blow, followed immediately by his desperate love and his absolute faith in her strength. You can do this, his voice whispered in her mind, and Lyra realized with shock that the bond had deepened during their separation. They could communicate telepathically now, their souls intertwining in ways that transcended the physical. I have to, she replied silently. For us. Grandmother Willow stepped forward, her white hair seeming to glow in the moonlight. Lyra Moonwhisper, do you understand what you face tonight? I understand that I must prove the truth of my bond with your alpha, Lyra replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. More than that, the elder corrected. You must face the deepest truths of your own heart. The trial will force you to confront everything you've hidden from, everything you've denied, everything you fear most about yourself. Her ancient eyes held compassion, but no mercy. Are you prepared? Lyra thought of her sister's cruel smile, of the hollow ache where her magic used to live, of the impossible love growing between her and a man she should consider her enemy. As prepared as anyone can be for the impossible. Grandmother Willow nodded approvingly. Then let us begin. The first circle tests honesty, your willingness to face uncomfortable truths. The second tests courage, your ability to act despite fear. The third tests sacrifice, your willingness to give up what you value most for the sake of love. She gestured to the first stone circle, and Lyra could see now that it was filled with some kind of silver liquid that reflected the moonlight like a mirror. Step into the pool of truth. It will show you visions of your past, your present, and your potential future. Some of what you see will be painful. Some will be terrifying. But you must not look away, and you must not lie to yourself about what you witness. Lyra walked to the edge of the circle on trembling legs. The silver liquid seemed to call to her, promising revelations she wasn't sure she wanted to face. Behind her, she could feel Kale's presence like a warm anchor, but she knew this was something she had to do alone. She stepped into the pool. The silver liquid was neither hot nor cold, but it sent electric shocks through her nervous system the moment it touched her skin. The world around her faded away, replaced by visions that struck her consciousness like lightning. First, she saw herself as a child, practicing magic under her father's approving gaze while Seraphina watched from the shadows, her small face already twisted with jealousy. She saw moments of casual cruelty. Times when she'd been thoughtless about her sister's feelings, when she'd accepted praise that should have been shared, when she'd been too caught up in her own achievements to notice Seraphina's growing pain. I was part of this, she realized with horror. I helped create the monster that destroyed us both. But the visions didn't stop there. She saw herself in recent decades, growing increasingly isolated despite her coven's respect. She saw the loneliness she'd hidden behind duty, the way she'd convinced herself that being needed was the same thing as being loved. She saw the fear she'd harbored deep in her heart, the terrible suspicion that without her magic, without her role as the coven's golden child, she was nothing at all. Chapter 7, Visions of Truth. The silver pool showed her more, each vision cutting deeper than the last. She watched herself from an outside perspective, seeing clearly for the first time how her unconscious arrogance had shaped every interaction with her sister. Every casual dismissal of Seraphina's ideas, every moment when she'd accepted their father's favoritism without question, every time she'd been too busy with important coven business to notice her sister's increasing isolation. But that doesn't justify what she did, Lyra thought desperately, trying to hold on to some sense of righteousness. The pool responded by showing her Seraphina's perspective, centuries of watching from the sidelines as opportunities, suitors, and accolades fell at Lyra's feet. Seraphina practicing magic alone in her room, desperate to prove herself worthy of attention. Seraphina volunteering for dangerous missions only to have them given to her more capable older sister. Seraphina slowly hardening her heart because love had brought her nothing but pain. The worst vision came last. Seraphina on the night she decided to curse Lyra, weeping as she gathered the dark magic necessary for such a terrible spell. Even in her moment of ultimate betrayal, she'd hesitated, love and hatred warring in her heart until hatred won. She loved me, Lyra realized with a gasp that sent ripples through the silver liquid. She loved me, and I never saw it. I was so focused on being perfect that I never saw how much she needed me to just be her sister. The knowledge was agony, but it was truth. And with truth came the first spark of real understanding. Her sister's curse hadn't just been about jealousy, it had been about forcing Lyra to experience what Seraphina had felt her whole life. Isolation. Powerlessness. The desperate need for love from someone who seemed unreachable. Maybe, Lyra thought as the vision began to fade, there's still a chance to fix this. If I can break the curse, if I can find my way back to her. But the pool wasn't finished with her yet. New visions flooded her consciousness, potential futures that branched out like a vast tree. She saw herself growing old and dying alone, the mate bond slowly killing Kale as her mortality consumed them both. She saw herself accepted by the pack but never truly belonging, always the outsider who'd disrupted their world. She saw Kale forced to choose between her and his people, the choice destroying him regardless of what he decided. And then she saw the darker possibilities. She saw herself becoming bitter like her sister, allowing the pain of her losses to poison her love for Kale. She saw herself using their bond to manipulate him, to gain power within the pack despite her lack of magic. She saw herself becoming everything she'd been raised to believe werewolves were: savage, selfish, destructive. I could become that, she admitted with brutal honesty. Without my magic, without my identity, I could become exactly what they fear I am. The realization should have been devastating, but instead it was oddly liberating. Because acknowledging the darkness within herself also meant acknowledging her power to choose differently. She wasn't doomed to repeat her family's mistakes, she could learn from them, grow beyond them, become something better. The visions began to shift again, showing her glimpses of what might be possible if she chose wisely. She saw herself and Kale growing old together, their bond deepening with each passing year. She saw their children, impossible hybrid beings who carried the best of both worlds. She saw peace between the species, understanding built on the foundation of love that transcended ancient hatred. But most importantly, she saw herself whole in a way she'd never been before. Not because she'd regained her magic, but because she'd found something more valuable, a love that accepted all of her, darkness and light together, and a purpose that wasn't about being perfect but about being real. The silver liquid began to recede, and Lyra found herself standing on solid ground once more. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, but she felt oddly cleansed. The first trial had stripped away her illusions about herself, and while the truth was painful, it was also freedom. Kale was at her side instantly, his arms coming around her as she swayed on unsteady feet. Through their bond, she could feel that he'd experienced every vision with her, felt every revelation as if it were his own. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest. "For all of it. For what my kind has done to yours, for what I've done to my own family, for bringing this chaos into your life." "Don't apologize for being human," he murmured, and she could hear the wonder in his voice. "Perfect creatures don't need love, only broken ones do. And we're both beautifully broken." Grandmother Willow approached them, her ancient eyes bright with approval. "The first trial is complete. You have faced truth and emerged whole. But the night is not over yet." She gestured to the second stone circle, this one filled with what looked like roiling black mist shot through with silver lightning. "The trial of courage awaits. Are you ready to face your fears?" Lyra looked at the swirling darkness and felt her newfound resolve waver. The first trial had been about truth, but truth was something you could process, understand, and integrate. Fear was more primal. It bypassed logic and struck directly at the animal brain's most basic survival instincts. "What will I face in there?" she asked. "Your deepest fears made manifest," Grandmother Willow replied. "Not illusions or phantoms, but real threats that could cause real harm. The trial doesn't distinguish between what's in your mind and what's in the world, it makes both equally dangerous." Kale's arms tightened around her protectively. "This is madness. She's mortal, her fears could literally kill her." "And yours could kill you both," Elena added from somewhere behind them, her voice carefully neutral. Lyra wondered if the second-in-command was beginning to regret calling for this trial, now that she understood the risks to her alpha. "I have to do this," Lyra said, gently extracting herself from Kale's embrace. "We both know there's no other way." She approached the second circle, and as she drew closer, she could hear things moving in the darkness. Whispers that sounded like her sister's voice. Growls that spoke of savage violence. The distant sound of weeping that might have been her own. "What am I most afraid of?" she asked herself as she prepared to step into the maelstrom. "Losing Kale? Dying alone? Never finding my way home?" But as her foot touched the edge of the circle, she realized her greatest fear was much simpler and much more terrifying, that everything she'd believed about herself was a lie. That without her magic, without her role in the coven, she was nothing but an empty shell pretending to be a person. The darkness engulfed her like a living thing, and suddenly she was standing in the ruins of her family's estate. The ancient manor house lay in smoking rubble, bodies scattered across the grounds like broken dolls. She could smell death in the air, thick and cloying, mixed with the acrid scent of magical fire. "You did this," Serafina's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "You abandoned us, and this is what happened." Lyra spun around, searching for her sister, but found only more devastation. The gardens where she'd played as a child were black and withered. The sacred groves where generations of her family had worked their magic were nothing but ash and bone. "I didn't abandon anyone," she said aloud, though her voice sounded small and uncertain in the vast emptiness. "I was cursed. I had no choice." "You had every choice." Serafina materialized from the shadows, but she was wrong somehow, too pale, too thin, her eyes black pits of accusation. "You could have stayed and fought the curse. You could have found another way. Instead, you ran to the wolves like a coward." The accusation hit home because part of Lyra had wondered the same thing. Had she given up too easily? Had there been some way to fight the curse that she'd been too frightened or too proud to consider? "I tried," she began, but Serafina cut her off with a laugh like breaking glass. "You tried nothing. You felt the first taste of mortality and ran straight to the arms of our enemies. How long before you forget us entirely? How long before you're helping them plan attacks on witch settlements?" The scene shifted around them, and suddenly Lyra was watching herself from the outside. But this version of herself was different, harder, more predatory. This Lyra stood beside Kale as he led a pack assault on a coven, her face cold with indifference as witches fell around her. "This is what you'll become," the specter of Serafina hissed. "This is what the bond will make you. You'll choose him over everything you've ever been, and you'll call it love." "That's not true," Lyra protested, but even as she spoke, she could feel the pull of the mate bond trying to influence her thoughts. The urge to prioritize Kale's needs over everything else, to see the world through his eyes rather than her own. The vision shifted again, showing her a different future. Kale lay dying in her arms, his life force slowly ebbing away as the mate bond drained him. All around them, his pack watched with accusing eyes. "You're killing him," Elena's voice echoed through the darkness. "Every day you stay mortal, every day you can't break the curse, you're stealing another piece of his life. He'll die because of you, and it will be slow and agonizing." Lyra fell to her knees as the weight of that possibility crashed over her. It was her greatest fear made manifest, that her presence in Kale's life would destroy him, that love would become poison, that she would take the one good thing in her shattered existence and ruin it through her own inadequacy. "I won't let that happen," she whispered, but the words felt hollow against the enormity of her fear. "How will you stop it?" Serafina's specter demanded. "You have no magic, no power, no way to fight the curse. You're nothing but a burden now, a weight dragging everyone you care about down into darkness." The fears multiplied, each one spawning new terrors. She saw herself losing her memories as mortality stripped away centuries of experience. She saw herself growing old and senile while Kale remained young, their bond becoming a mockery of what it had once been. She saw their potential children born as abominations, rejected by both species and belonging to neither. But worst of all, she saw herself giving up. She saw herself walking away from Kale, from the pack, from any chance at happiness, because she was too afraid to risk hurting the people she loved. "That's what cowards do," her own voice echoed back at her from the darkness. "They run away and call it noble sacrifice." The accusation stung because it was true. Running away had been her first instinct when the curse struck, flee to the mountains, seek salvation from strangers, avoid the painful work of facing her problems head-on. Even now, part of her wanted to disappear into the wilderness rather than risk failing the trial and destroying Kale in the process. But as she knelt there in the darkness, surrounded by her fears made manifest, Lyra realized something important. Fear itself wasn't the enemy, cowardice was. Fear was just information, a warning system that helped her identify what mattered most. And what mattered most was love. Not just her love for Kale, but love in all its forms, the love she'd failed to show her sister, the love she'd discovered within his pack despite their differences, the love she was slowly learning to feel for herself. "You're right," she said, rising to her feet and addressing the swirling darkness around her. "I am afraid. I'm terrified that I'll fail everyone I care about, that I'll never be strong enough or good enough or worthy enough to deserve the love I've found. But I'm going to try anyway." Chapter 8: The Heart of Courage. The declaration seemed to pause the swirling chaos around her. Lyra stood straighter, feeling something shift deep in her chest. Not the return of her magic, that was still gone, still an aching void, but something else. Something that had always been there, buried beneath layers of expectation and self-doubt. "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Trying to be worthy of love instead of understanding that love isn't something you earn, it's something you give and receive freely, flaws and all." The specter of Serafina flickered, her accusatory expression wavering. "Pretty words. But words won't save the people you'll fail." "Maybe not," Lyra agreed. "Maybe I will fail. Maybe the curse can't be broken, maybe Kale and I are doomed, maybe I'll never see my family again. But I'd rather fail trying than succeed at running away." She thought of Kale waiting for her outside the circle, sharing her pain and fear through their bond. He'd already chosen to risk everything for her, his position as alpha, his standing with the pack, potentially his life. The least she could do was be brave enough to fight for what they'd found together. "I'm not just afraid of failing," she realized aloud. "I'm afraid of succeeding. Because if I break this curse, if I find a way to bridge the gap between our species, if I actually manage to build something good from this disaster, then I'll have to admit that my sister's betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. And that feels like a betrayal of its own." The darkness around her began to shift, showing her new visions. These weren't fears but possibilities. Futures where her curse led to healing not just for herself but for both species. She saw herself as a bridge between worlds, helping other impossible couples find acceptance. She saw Serafina years in the future, older and sadder but finally free of the poison that had consumed her. She saw a world where witch and werewolf children played together without fear. "The curse wasn't meant to save you," Serafina's specter said, but her voice was different now, less accusatory, more wistful. "It was meant to destroy you." "I know," Lyra replied. "But sometimes the things meant to destroy us end up transforming us instead. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us leads to the best thing that could happen to us." She thought about the mate bond, how it had felt like an impossible burden when she first understood what it meant. Now she couldn't imagine existing without it. Kale's presence in her mind was like a constant source of strength, reminding her that she wasn't alone in this fight. "You'll still lose everything," the darkness whispered, making one last attempt to break her resolve. "Your magic, your immortality, your place in the world. Even if you break the curse, you can never go back to what you were." "Good," Lyra said firmly. "What I was wasn't working. I was powerful but not strong, immortal but not really alive, perfect but not whole. If breaking the curse means becoming something new, something better, then that's exactly what I want." The fears around her began to dissolve, not because they were conquered but because she'd acknowledged them without letting them control her. Fear of failure, fear of success, fear of change, fear of staying the same, they were all part of being human, part of being real. As the darkness cleared, she found herself standing in the circle once again, Kale's worried face the first thing she saw. But this time, she didn't collapse into his arms. Instead, she stood on her own feet, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. "The second trial is complete," Grandmother Willow announced, her voice carrying a note of surprised respect. You have faced fear and found courage. But one trial remains, the most difficult of all. Lyra looked at the third circle and felt her breath catch. This one contained neither silver liquid nor roiling darkness. Instead, it held something far more terrifying, nothing. Just an empty stone ring that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The trial of sacrifice, the elder continued. You must give up what you value most in order to prove your love is true. The circle will show you what must be surrendered, and you must let it go completely, with no guarantee that you'll ever get it back. Kale moved closer to her, his face pale with understanding. If the trial demands she sacrifice our bond? Then I'll do it, Lyra interrupted quietly. Love isn't about holding on, it's about being willing to let go when letting go is what's best for the person you love. She approached the empty circle, and as she did, images began to form in the void. Not visions this time, but choices. She saw herself offered the chance to reclaim her magic, all she had to do was walk away from Kale and never look back. She saw the possibility of immortality restored, but only if she abandoned her mate to a slow death from their broken bond. Most temptingly of all, she saw the chance to go back in time, to prevent her sister's betrayal by being the sister Seraphina had needed all along. All she had to do was sacrifice this timeline, this love, this impossible chance at happiness. Choose, a voice whispered from the void, not her sister's voice this time, but something older and more impartial. The universe itself, perhaps, or fate, or whatever force governed the balance between love and loss. Lyra stared at the choices before her, each one offering her something she desperately wanted. Her magic had been her identity for centuries, without it, she felt like a book with half its pages torn out. Immortality was safety, the promise that she'd have endless chances to get things right. And the opportunity to fix things with Seraphina, to heal the wound that had started this whole catastrophe. But as she considered each option, she realized they all had one thing in common. They required her to give up the person she was becoming in favor of the person she used to be. They asked her to choose safety over growth, the familiar over the unknown, the past over the future. I know what I have to sacrifice, she said aloud, and felt Kale's sharp intake of breath behind her. She stepped into the empty circle, and immediately felt the void trying to pull something from her. Not her bond with Kale, that was too new, too intertwined with who she was becoming. Not her love for her family. That was eternal, unchangeable despite everything that had happened. Instead, the void reached for something deeper, her need to be perfect, her fear of being ordinary, her desperate desire to be special enough to deserve love. It was the core belief that had driven her entire life, the foundation on which she'd built her identity. And it was what had made her vulnerable to her sister's jealousy in the first place. I sacrifice my need to be more than human, she whispered, and felt the void eagerly accept her offering. The pain was indescribable, worse than losing her magic, worse than the physical agony of the curse. It felt like having her ego surgically removed, leaving her raw and exposed and utterly ordinary. But as the old need dissolved, something new took its place. Not the desperate hunger for validation she'd carried for centuries, but a quiet sense of worth that had nothing to do with external achievement. I am enough, she realized with wonder. Not because I'm special or powerful or chosen. Just because I'm me. The empty circle filled with light, not the harsh glare of magic, but the warm glow of acceptance. When it faded, Lyra found herself standing on solid ground once more, but she felt fundamentally changed. Lighter somehow, as if she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't even realized was there. Chapter 9, Transformation. The moment Lyra stepped out of the final circle, something extraordinary happened. The mate bond between her and Kale didn't just pulse, it exploded outward in a wave of pure, transformative energy that swept through the entire pack gathering. Every werewolf present felt it, a connection so powerful and pure that it left them staggering. But more than that, Lyra felt something else stirring within her. Not her old magic, that was gone forever, sacrificed to her sister's curse. This was something entirely new, something that seemed to flow from the bond itself and transform as it moved through her. "What's happening to me?" she gasped, looking down at her hands as they began to glow with a soft, silver light. Grandmother Willow's eyes went wide with amazement. "Impossible," she breathed. "You're manifesting pack magic. But you're not a werewolf." "No," Lyra said, understanding flooding through her. "But I'm his mate. And mates share everything, don't they? Including their supernatural nature." She could feel it now, not the chaotic, individual power she'd wielded as a witch, but something more collaborative. Pack magic was about community, about individuals working together to create something greater than the sum of their parts. And somehow, through the mate bond, she'd become part of that community. Cale stared at her in wonder. "You're not becoming a werewolf," he said slowly. "You're becoming something new. Something that's never existed before." The silver light around Lyra's hands intensified, and she instinctively reached out toward the nearest injured pack member, a young man who'd been sporting a bandaged arm from a recent hunting accident. The moment her glowing fingers touched the bandage, the wound underneath healed completely. Gasps echoed through the gathering. Werewolves had accelerated healing, but this was something different, instantaneous regeneration that left no scar, no trace that injury had ever existed. "Healer magic," Marcus whispered in awe. "The old stories spoke of it, but no one's seen it for 1,000 years. Because it requires perfect balance," Grandmother Willow said, her voice filled with reverence. "A perfect union between two souls, two species, two different types of power. The trials didn't just test your worthiness, they prepared you for this transformation." Lyra looked around at the assembled pack, seeing the wonder and acceptance in their faces where moments before there had been suspicion and hostility. Even Elena was staring at her with something approaching respect. "Does this mean the curse is broken?" Cale asked, hope and fear warring in his voice. Lyra closed her eyes and searched within herself for the familiar taint of dark magic. It was still there, but weakened, as if the new power flowing through her was slowly burning it away. "Not yet," she said. "But I can feel it happening. The curse is unraveling, bit by bit. I think it will take time. The transformation isn't instant." She turned to face the pack, drawing strength from Cale's presence beside her and from the new magic humming in her veins. "I know I'm asking for a lot. I know centuries of hatred between our species can't be erased in one night. But I'm hoping we can build something new together. Something that honors both what we've been and what we could become." An old woman near the back of the crowd stepped forward, not Grandmother Willow, but another elder with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "You saved my grandson's arm," she said simply. "That's enough for me." Others began to nod in agreement. The demonstration of healing magic had done more to convince them than any words could have. Here was proof that the bond between Lyra and Cale could create something beneficial, something that served the pack rather than threatening it. "There will be conditions," Elena said, but her voice lacked its earlier hostility. "Integration isn't just about acceptance, it's about responsibility. If you're truly going to be part of this pack, you need to understand our ways, our laws, our traditions." "I want to learn," Lyra said sincerely. "I want to understand what it means to be part of something larger than myself." Elena studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we'll start your education tomorrow. Tonight." She glanced at Cale, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, or a farewell to whatever might have been. "Tonight, you should rest. The trials have taken a lot out of both of you." As the crowd began to disperse, pack members approached Lyra one by one. Some offered words of welcome, others asked about her healing abilities, a few simply nodded in acknowledgement. Each interaction felt like a small victory, a bridge built across centuries of mistrust. But it was Grandmother Willow who pulled her aside for the most important conversation. "The power you've manifested, it's not just healing," the elder said in a low voice. "That was just the first manifestation. the easiest for the pack to understand and accept. But I can sense greater potential in you. The ability to bridge not just the gap between yourself and Kale, but between entire communities. What do you mean? Lyra asked, though she suspected she already knew. Your sister's curse was meant to destroy you by forcing you to love your enemies, Grandmother Willow explained. But magic has a way of turning intentions on their head. What if the curse becomes the very thing that brings peace between our peoples? What if your transformation is just the beginning? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Lyra had spent the trials learning to let go of her need to be special, only to discover that she might be more unique than she'd ever imagined. But this time, it felt different. This time, the specialness wasn't about her own glory, it was about service, about using her unique position to help others. There will be others, she realized aloud. Other impossible pairs, other star-crossed lovers who think their bonds are abominations. If I can show them that it's possible. Exactly, Grandmother Willow smiled. But one step at a time, child. First, you must complete your own transformation. The curse may be unraveling, but it's not gone yet. And your sister. The elder's expression grew troubled. Your sister will not be pleased to learn that her revenge has become your salvation. A chill ran down Lyra's spine as she remembered Seraphina's parting words. The curse hadn't just been about punishment, it had been about forcing Lyra to become everything she despised. When Seraphina learned that the plan had backfired so spectacularly. She'll come for me, Lyra said with certainty. Once she realizes what's happened, she'll come to finish what she started. Then we'll be ready for her, Kale said, appearing beside them with the silent grace that came naturally to all werewolves. You're part of this pack now, Lyra. And we protect our own. The simple declaration sent warmth flooding through her chest. For the first time in her life, she truly belonged somewhere, not because of what she could do or what she represented, but because of who she was choosing to become. But even as she allowed herself to feel hope, Lyra knew their trials were far from over. Breaking the curse was only the beginning. Now came the harder task of building a life together, of proving that love really could triumph over hatred, of becoming the bridge their two species desperately needed. Chapter 10, The Reckoning. 3 weeks after the trials, Lyra had settled into pack life with surprising ease. Her healing abilities had made her invaluable to the community, not just for treating injuries, but for helping with difficult births, easing the pain of elderly pack members, and even treating illnesses that normally would have required a trip to human medical facilities. More importantly, she was learning what it meant to be part of a true family. Unlike the hierarchical structure of her coven, where worth was measured by magical ability and bloodline, the pack operated on principles of mutual support and shared responsibility. Everyone had a role to play, from the youngest cubs to the eldest seniors, and everyone's contribution was valued. She'd moved into Kale's cabin, and they were slowly learning to navigate their bond as it continued to deepen. The mate connection brought incredible intimacy. They could sense each other's emotions, share thoughts when they chose to, and provide comfort simply through proximity. But it also required constant communication and compromise, as they learned to balance individual needs with their desire to be together. The curse was definitely weakening. Lyra could feel it loosening its grip day by day, the dark magic gradually dissolving under the sustained power of the mate bond and her new pack magic. Grandmother Willow estimated it would be completely gone within another month or two. Which was why Seraphina's arrival came as such a shock. Lyra was in the pack's communal garden, helping to harvest vegetables for the evening meal, when every supernatural sense she possessed suddenly screamed danger. The birds fell silent, the air grew thick with dark magic, and the scent of bitter herbs filled the clearing. Kale, she called out through their bond, not bothering to use her voice. He was there within seconds, along with Elena and half a dozen other pack members. But they were too late to prevent what came next. Seraphina materialized in the center of the garden like a nightmare-given form. She was thinner than Lyra remembered, her auburn hair now streaked with premature white, her emerald eyes burning with a fury that seemed to consume her from within. Dark magic crackled around her like lightning, and the very ground beneath her feet began to wither and die. "Hello, sister," she said, her voice carrying the chill of winter and the promise of death. "I see you've been making friends." The pack members immediately shifted into defensive positions, several partially transforming so that claws and fangs were ready for battle. But Lyra stepped forward, placing herself between Seraphina and the others. "Sarah," she said quietly. "I wondered when you'd come." "Did you?" Seraphina's laugh was like breaking glass. "Did you wonder while you were playing house with the animals? Did you think of me while you were betraying everything our family stands for?" "Our family?" Lyra felt a flash of anger. "You destroyed our family when you cursed me. You cast me out, stripped away my magic, condemned me to die. And now you're angry because I found a way to survive?" "Survive?" Seraphina's voice rose to a shriek. "You call this survival? You've become an abomination, Lyra. A witch-wolf hybrid that belongs to neither world. You've perverted the very nature of magic itself." She gestured sharply, and dark energy lashed out toward Kale. But Lyra was ready for it. Her new healing magic transformed, becoming something harder and more protective. A silver shield materialized between Seraphina's attack and her mate, deflecting the blow harmlessly into the sky. "You can't fight me," Seraphina snarled. "I've grown stronger since our last meeting. Stronger and far more desperate." That's when Lyra noticed the shadows moving behind her sister, dark shapes that resolved into three other figures. Witches from their coven, but changed somehow. Their eyes were black voids, their skin pale as bone, and dark magic writhed around them like living smoke. "Blood magic," Grandmother Willow's voice came from behind Lyra, filled with horror. "She's been practicing blood magic. It's corrupted her completely." "It's made me powerful enough to do what should have been done long ago," Seraphina corrected. "The wolves are a disease, and you've become their willing victim. But I can still save you, sister. I can burn out their infection and restore you to what you were meant to be." "I don't want to be restored," Lyra said firmly. "I like who I'm becoming. I like the life I'm building here. And I love him." She felt Kale's hand slip into hers, warm and steady and reassuring. Through their bond, she could sense the entire pack rallying around them, not just the ones present in the garden, but the whole community united in determination to protect their newest member. "Then you leave me no choice," Seraphina said sadly. "I'll have to kill them all. Starting with your precious Alpha." The attack came without warning, not the flashy display of power Lyra had expected, but something far more insidious. Dark tendrils of magic spread out from Seraphina and her corrupted allies, seeking to invade the minds of every pack member present. It was a spell designed to turn their own strength against them, to make them tear each other apart while the witches watched. But Seraphina had made a crucial miscalculation. She'd expected to face individual werewolves, each fighting alone. Instead, she encountered something that hadn't existed for 1,000 years, a pack united not just by loyalty, but by magic itself. Lyra felt the dark magic hit the pack's defenses and simply stop. Her healing power, amplified by every pack member present, created a network of protection that the corrupted magic couldn't penetrate. More than that, it began to purify the attack, transforming Seraphina's hatred into something that merely scattered harmlessly in the wind. "Impossible," Seraphina breathed, staggering backward as her spell not only failed but actively rejected her. "You're just one witch with diminished power. You can't possibly." "I'm not one witch," Lyra said, her voice carrying new authority. "I'm part of something larger. Something you never understood because you were too focused on individual power to see the strength that comes from true connection." The pack magic flowing through her intensified, and suddenly she could see the truth of what her sister had become. The blood magic hadn't just corrupted Seraphina, it was consuming her, eating away at her very soul in exchange for temporary power. The other witches with her were barely alive, more like magical puppets than independent beings. "Oh, Sarah," Lyra whispered, her anger transforming into heartbreak. "What have you done to yourself?" For just a moment, her sister's mask of fury slipped, revealing the frightened, lonely woman underneath. "I did what I had to do. I sacrificed everything to become strong enough to save you." "You sacrificed everything to become strong enough to control me," Lyra corrected gently. "But I don't need saving. I need the sister I used to love. The one who used to braid flowers in my hair and tell me stories about the old magic." Seraphina's composure cracked completely. Tears began streaming down her face, carving tracks through the dark magic that had settled on her skin like soot. "She's gone," she sobbed. "I killed her to make room for what I had to become. There's nothing left of who I used to be." "That's not true." Lyra stepped closer, her healing magic reaching out tentatively toward her sister. "It's never too late to choose differently. The blood magic can be cleansed, the corruption can be healed. You just have to let me help you." But even as she spoke, Lyra could see the truth in Seraphina's eyes. Her sister was too far gone, too invested in her hatred and her pain to accept salvation. The blood magic had become part of her identity, and choosing to let it go would mean admitting that everything she'd done had been wrong. "I can't," Seraphina whispered. "I've gone too far. Done too much. The only way this ends is with one of us dead." She raised her hands for a final attack, and Lyra felt the full weight of her sister's corrupted power gathering like a storm. This wasn't just intended to kill her, it was designed to destroy everything she'd built, everyone she'd come to love, the very possibility of peace between their species. Which meant Lyra had only one choice. Chapter 11: The Sacrifice of Love. Time seemed to slow as Lyra made her decision. She could feel Seraphina's final attack building, not just dark magic, but something far worse. Her sister had decided to sacrifice her own life force in exchange for enough power to level the entire pack settlement. It was a kamikaze attack born of desperation and madness, and there was only one way to stop it. Lyra reached out through the mate bond, not just to Kale but to every member of the pack present. "Trust me," she whispered through the connection. "And whatever happens, don't try to stop me." Before anyone could react, she stepped forward and opened herself completely to Seraphina's attack. Not to defend against it, but to absorb it. To take all that hatred and corruption and dark magic into herself and transform it through the power of love. The pain was indescribable. It felt like being struck by lightning made of pure malice, like having acid poured directly into her soul. The corrupted magic fought against her healing power, seeking to twist everything good in her into something ugly and destructive. But Lyra held on, drawing strength from her bond with Kale and from the pack magic flowing through her. She thought of the trials she'd passed, the truths she'd faced, the fears she'd conquered. She thought of the love she'd found and the family she'd chosen. And most importantly, she thought of the sister she'd once known, the bright, curious girl who'd been lost beneath layers of pain and jealousy. "I forgive you," she said aloud, her voice somehow carrying over the roar of magical energy. "For all of it, Sarah. I forgive you, and I love you, and I'm sorry I wasn't the sister you needed me to be." The words hit Seraphina like a physical blow. The dark magic wavered, confusion replacing calculation in her corrupted features. "No," she gasped. "You can't forgive me. Not after what I've done. Not after what I'm doing right now." "I can and I do," Lyra replied firmly. "Because holding on to anger would just make me into what you've become. And because somewhere underneath all that pain, my real sister is still in there." She reached out, not with magic but with simple human connection, and touched Seraphina's face gently. The contact should have been impossible with so much dark energy crackling between them, but love, it turned out, was stronger than hate. For just a moment, Seraphina's true self shone through. The corruption fell away like a mask, revealing the sister Lyra remembered, beautiful and brilliant and desperately sad. "I missed you," she whispered. every day for 3 centuries, I missed you. I missed you too, Lyra replied, tears streaming down her face. And I'm going to keep missing you. But this isn't how our story has to end. Serafina looked around at the pack members surrounding them, at Kale whose face was tight with worry for his mate, at Grandmother Willow who watched with ancient, understanding eyes. They'll never accept me. Not after what I've done. They'll learn to, Lyra said with certainty. Just like I did. Just like you can, if you choose to try. The dark magic was still flowing between them, but it was changing now. Instead of seeking to corrupt and destroy, it was being transformed by their connection, purified by forgiveness and love. Lyra felt the last traces of her sister's curse finally dissolving, burned away by power far greater than any magic. But the process was taking everything she had. She could feel her life force being drained, her newly transformed nature pushed beyond its limits. Saving her sister meant sacrificing herself, not because the magic demanded it, but because there simply wasn't enough of her to contain all that corrupted power and transform it safely. No, Kale's voice reached her through the bond, filled with desperate understanding. Lyra, you can't. If you die, we both die. The mate bond will save us both, she replied with sudden clarity. Trust me. She looked one last time at her sister, memorizing every detail of Serafina's face as the corruption finally fell away completely. I love you, she whispered. Remember that. Then she let the transformation complete itself, pouring every ounce of her being into the healing magic that would save not just Serafina, but break the cycle of hatred that had consumed their family for generations. The world went white. Chapter 12, Rebirth. Lyra woke to the sensation of warm sunlight on her face and the familiar scent of pine and rain that always surrounded Kale. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. Then memory flooded back, the confrontation with Serafina, the corrupted magic, her desperate gamble to save them all. Am I dead? She asked without opening her eyes. Kale's laugh was shaky with relief. If you are, then so am I. And so is half the pack, for that matter. She opened her eyes to find herself in their cabin, surrounded by concerned faces. Kale sat beside the bed holding her hand, while Grandmother Willow checked her pulse with practiced fingers. Elena stood near the window, her expression unreadable, and scattered around the room were various pack members, all wearing expressions of profound relief. How long was I out? Lyra asked, struggling to sit up. She felt different, not weak exactly, but changed in some fundamental way. 3 days, Kale replied, helping her settle against the pillows. We weren't sure you were going to wake up. The magical backlash from what you did. He shook his head in amazement. No one's ever seen anything like it. What I did? Lyra frowned, trying to piece together the events. Did it work? Is Serafina alive and uncorrupted? Grandmother Willow confirmed. Though she's been unconscious for almost as long as you have. When she wakes up, she'll be as mortal as you were when you first arrived here. The blood magic burned itself out completely. Lyra felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that her sister was alive, sadness that Serafina had lost her magic too, but underneath it all, a deep sense of rightness. It was the only way, she said quietly. The corruption had gone too deep for any other healing to reach. You nearly died saving someone who tried to kill us all, Elena said from her position by the window, but there was no accusation in her voice, only wonder. That's either the most foolish thing I've ever seen, or the most brave. Sometimes there's not much difference between the two, Lyra replied with a small smile. There's something else, Kale said, his voice careful. The magical surge you created when you transformed Serafina's corruption, it didn't just affect her. It spread out across both territories, witch and wolf. Every supernatural creature within 100 miles felt it. Lyra's eyes widened. What kind of effect? Healing, Grandmother Willow said simply. Old wounds closed, chronic illnesses disappeared, and more importantly, the magical barriers that have kept our peoples apart for centuries have begun to dissolve. We've already had 3 witches arrive asking for sanctuary, and 2 of our own scouts have been welcomed into a coven that's been hostile to us for decades. The implications were staggering. Lyra had set out to break her own curse and had somehow begun healing the ancient rift between their species. That's not possible. I'm not that powerful. No, Kale agreed, his amber eyes warm with love and pride. But you're that loving. And love, it turns out, is the most transformative magic of all. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Elena moved to answer it, and Lyra heard a familiar voice that made her heart leap. Is she awake? Can I see her? Serafina appeared in the doorway, looking pale and shaken but blessedly free of the dark corruption that had consumed her. She moved hesitantly, as if unsure of her welcome, her eyes fixed on Lyra with an expression of desperate hope. Sarah, Lyra breathed, and suddenly nothing else mattered, not the pain of the past, not the uncertainty of the future, nothing but the fact that her sister was alive and whole and standing before her. Serafina crossed the room in a rush, falling to her knees beside the bed and grasping Lyra's free hand. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. For all of it. The curse, the corruption, the things I said and did. I was so consumed by jealousy and pain that I lost sight of everything that actually mattered. We both made mistakes, Lyra said gently, squeezing her sister's fingers. But we're both still here, and that means we have a chance to do better. I don't deserve forgiveness, Serafina whispered. Not after what I became. Deserving has nothing to do with it, Lyra replied firmly. I forgive you because I love you, and because holding on to anger would poison everything good I've found here. Besides, she added with a shaky laugh, you technically gave me the greatest gift of my life. If you hadn't cursed me, I never would have met Kale. Serafina looked up at the Alpha, who had been watching the reunion with careful eyes. I owe you an apology too, she said formally. I came here intending to destroy everything you'd built. Instead, you protected my sister even when she chose to save the person who was trying to kill her. She's my mate, Kale said simply. Protecting the people she loves is the same as protecting her. The simple acceptance in his voice seemed to break something loose in Serafina's chest. She began crying again, but these were cleaner tears, grief and relief rather than corruption and rage. What happens now? She asked when she'd composed herself. I'm mortal now, powerless. I don't belong anywhere. You belong with family, Lyra said immediately. If you want to stay here, I'm sure we can find a place for you. The pack is always willing to welcome people who genuinely want to change. It won't be easy, Elena interjected, though not unkindly. There will be people who remember what you did, who won't trust you easily. You'll have to prove yourself over time. I understand, Serafina replied. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I've spent 3 centuries being angry and bitter. I'd like to try something different. Grandmother Willow stepped forward, her ancient eyes warm with approval. Then you'll have the chance. The transformation that Lyra triggered has opened doors that have been sealed for. Over the following weeks, Lyra watched her sister slowly integrate into pack life. It wasn't easy. Serafina had to learn to exist without magic, had to earn the trust of people she'd threatened, had to rebuild her entire sense of identity. But she approached each challenge with a determination that reminded Lyra of the sister she'd known centuries ago. More importantly, other changes were rippling out from their small pack. Delegations arrived regularly now, witches curious about pack magic, werewolves interested in learning from coven libraries, and most remarkably, couples like Lyra and Kale who had found love across species lines and were seeking guidance on how to make such relationships work. We're going to need a bigger territory, Kale said one evening as they watched another group of visitors being welcomed by the pack. Or maybe it's time to stop thinking in terms of territories, Lyra replied thoughtfully. Maybe it's time to start thinking about shared communities. They were sitting on the porch of their cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. 6 months had passed since Serafina's arrival, and the changes continued to accelerate. 3 interspecies couples had mated within their extended community, children who showed abilities from both bloodlines were being born, and the ancient prophecies spoke of a new age of cooperation rather than conflict. "Are you happy?" Kale asked, slipping his arm around her shoulders. Lyra considered the question seriously. She was mortal now, aging gradually as any human would. Her magic was different, not the individual power she'd once wielded, but something collaborative and community-based. She would never again be the person she'd been before Serafina's curse. But she was surrounded by family, both the one she'd been born into and the one she'd chosen. She was part of something larger than herself, contributing to healing that extended far beyond her own personal struggles. And she was deeply, completely loved by a man who saw all her flaws and chose her anyway. "Yes," she said with certainty. "I'm happy. Not because everything is perfect, but because it's real. Because we're building something beautiful together, one day at a time." Kale's response was to pull her closer and kiss her deeply, the mate bond humming with contentment between them. In the distance, Lyra could hear Serafina laughing with some of the pack children, teaching them the old songs their grandmother used to sing. It wasn't the life she'd planned or the destiny she'd imagined. But it was the life she'd chosen, built from the ashes of everything she'd lost and transformed by the power of love that transcended all boundaries. Epilogue, 5 years later. The ceremony took place in the same clearing where Lyra had first been tested by the pack, but now it looked completely different. Flowers from both witch gardens and wolf territories created a riot of color around the ancient stone circles. Representatives from dozens of covens and packs stood together in the audience, their children playing freely among the ceremonial decorations. Lyra stood at the altar wearing a dress that combined the flowing elegance of witch fashion with the practical embroidery of pack clothing. Beside her, Kale was resplendent in ceremonial robes that had been gifts from both communities. But the real marvel was what stood behind them, an arch woven from branches by werewolf hands and blessed with magic by witch elders, representing the union of their peoples as much as their personal bond. 5 years ago, we would have called this impossible, Grandmother Willow said as she began the ceremony. A witch and a werewolf, standing before both their peoples to formalize a bond that was once considered an abomination. But you've shown us that the only impossible thing is love that asks us to remain unchanged. The vows they exchanged were their own, written together over long evenings and countless conversations about what partnership truly meant. Not the desperate need of the mate bond's early days, but mature love built on choice and commitment and daily acts of kindness. "I promise to see you clearly," Lyra said, looking into Kale's amber eyes. "Not as the salvation I thought I needed, but as the partner I choose every day. I promise to grow alongside you, to challenge you when necessary, and to support you always." "I promise to love all of you," Kale replied. "The powerful witch you were, the transformed woman you became, and whoever you'll be tomorrow. I promise to build a life worthy of the miracle we've been given." When they kissed to seal their vows, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers that could be heard for miles. But Lyra barely noticed the celebration. Her attention was caught by a small figure in the front row, a 3-year-old girl with Kale's amber eyes and hair that shifted between Lyra's dark brown and something uniquely silver. Their daughter, Arya, was the first of her kind, part witch, part werewolf, part something entirely new. She would grow up in a world where such hybrid children were not just accepted but celebrated, where the old barriers between species were dissolving more each year. As the formal ceremony gave way to a celebration that would last well into the night, Lyra found herself standing with Serafina near the refreshment tables. Her sister had never remarried or found a mate of her own, but she discovered a calling as a teacher, helping newly mortal witches and lone werewolves adapt to community life. "Any regrets?" Serafina asked quietly, watching as Kale spun their daughter through the air, both of them laughing with pure joy. Lyra considered the question seriously. She thought about the magic she'd lost, the immortality she'd given up, the simple life she might have lived if her sister had never cast that curse. Then she looked at her husband and daughter, at the mixed community they'd helped build, at the future full of possibilities stretching ahead of them. "Not a single one," she said with complete honesty. "Being cursed by a jealous sister and saved by a forbidden mate was the best thing that ever happened to me." Serafina smiled, the first truly unguarded expression Lyra had seen from her since they were children. "Then I'm glad I was jealous enough and foolish enough to set it all in motion." As night fell and the celebration continued around them, Lyra felt a deep sense of completion. Not the ending of a story, but the transformation of it. She'd begun this journey as a victim of betrayal, continued it as a woman searching for salvation, and completed it as someone who'd learned the most important truth of all. Love wasn't something you found or earned or deserved. It was something you chose, every day, in ways both large and small. And when that choice was made with courage and honesty and hope, it had the power to transform not just individual lives, but entire worlds. The curse that had once seemed like the end of everything had become the beginning of everything. And as Lyra danced with her mate under the stars, surrounded by family both born and chosen, she knew their story was just getting started. The end.